Further debate. The member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to take the opportunity in this Opposition Day motion to sort of lay out where New Democrats think that the vision of Ontario should be and why we think it's different than both the Liberals and the Conservatives are doing when it comes to their particular approach. And let me just start with the government, only because they are the government, and we should start from that point, is that one thing is really clear. If you take a look at people back home in all of our constituencies, I don't care where your riding is, people back home are starting to feel the pinch more and more every day as a result of many of the decisions that this government has taken. I have talked to I don't know how many constituents, and I'm sure it's the same with government members and opposition members from both parties when it comes to the price of hydro. Constituents are saying, I can't afford it anymore. The price of my hydro bill has gone up exponentially by over 100% since this government has taken office, and they're looking at their hydro bills going up yet again. We saw an increase on May the 1st of our hydro bills going up. We saw the government Minister of Energy say, oh, it's not a big deal, it's only the price of a coffee. Well, you know, the reality, it's not the price of a coffee. People are paying more for hydro now than they ever have in the past. We're paying more than any other jurisdiction, at least in Canada, if not in North America. And people are really feeling squeezed when it comes to the ability to make ends meet at the end of the month. And to make matters worse, Ontario Hydro, with this billing system that they've got, that they've changed their computer software programs, have created all kinds of havoc for constituents across the province. I've got people in my constituency who receive bills for $20,000 and $30,000 for hydro that they didn't use. And then they spend the next 6 to 8 months between ourselves and them, the Ombudsman and the Office of the President of Hydro, trying to fix these muck-ups that have happened when it comes to the hydro bill. And it's just really disconcerting to people. Imagine you're a small business person and you received a hydro bill in excess of $30,000 for hydro that you didn't use. You say, how am I going to pay for that? You know, the small business, it's a difference between keeping their doors open and keeping their doors closed. And of course, I'd be remiss to not talk about what happened with hydro and high hydro rates when it comes to the city of Timmins. We lost our Extrata smelter refinery as a result of high hydro prices that this government encouraged by way of the policies that they've established, and was started under the Tories, I would say, under the deregulation of Ontario Hydro and the move towards what eventually the Liberals accelerated. And now what we've got is, it became so expensive in Ontario for a refinery that uses electricity as a means of energy to melt the natural resource into a finished product, that they closed down the plant and they moved to Noranda. Why? Because you can buy hydro in Noranda at half the price. So here we are creating an economic disadvantage for the people and the companies in this province beyond the pale. And so I just say, you know, when it comes to what this government has done just on the hydro file, it is really disconcerting what it's meant to people in on their everyday life. Not to speak about when this government was first elected, they made a big pledge. They said, Dalton McGuinty, you remember? I will not raise taxes. He did the pledge. One of the first things he did when he came to government is he raised the HST. And New Democrats at the time says, God, no, don't do that. Now, I know that there's some people within my party that would say, well, we should look at that and we should support increase of taxes. I think we need to be careful about who pays those taxes and how we pay them, and to make sure that it's fair. The problem with the HST is that those people who could least afford to pay are those who got socked with having to pay that tax. So we as New Democrats had a great problem here in the caucus with that, because we saw it as it's yet again a shifting of the burden of taxation from those who can most afford to pay to those who can least afford to pay. And my colleague, the whip for the NDP, I think made some very good points along that line. We as New Democrats have always said, we have never been, as a party, opposed to the issue of taxation, because we understand that taxation is how you pay for those things that Ontarians want, healthcare, education, our roads, etc. But it's who pays the tax. And if you look at what New Democrats have done under Andrew Horwath, it's been pretty darn clear. During the first budget negotiations with Mr. McGuinty, when this minority parliament came back, we proposed a fairness tax. We said, let's tax those people over $500,000 a year who can afford to pay the tax, generate revenue that's necessary in order to bring down the deficit, because we need to balance our books. At one point, if the credit card isn't paid, you just stop being able to purchase. So we said, let's do a fairness tax in order to give those people in Ontario who can most afford to pay those taxes to pay them, so that we can make sure that we can fund those programs that are very important, like healthcare and education, and we can work at reducing the debt. You will see that just not long ago, I think it was last week, our leader, Andrew Horwath, on behalf of our caucus, talked about an investment in transit, about how transit is not just the City of Toronto, as we understand, but it's cities and towns across this province, and it's about regions across this province. And we said we shouldn't do an emphasis just to do a fix for transit in one community. We should look at Ontario, and we should have an investment that allows us to make sure that there's proper GO services to places like London, places like Waterloo, that there be train service restored to the City of Timmins, that we have services in Niagara, that we have electrification of trains all the way from downtown Union Station over to the airport, and that's going to cost money to make, I should say. And so we said, we believe that there's room, a modest increase on the corporate tax in order to be able to make the money, part of the money that's necessary to be able to pay for those things. As well as, we said, listen, it is preposterous that this government is going to give $1.5 billion away on HST inputs to companies in this province. It's money that they're already paying. It's not as if they're going to miss it. And we, as a result of the deal that this Liberal government has negotiated with I was going to call him Mulrooney, but the Prime Minister, Mr. Harper, in Ottawa, is going to give $1.5 billion back to the corporate sector, back to businesses, and I'm not talking small business here, this is really corporate Ontario, are going to get $1.5 billion back by way of HST input. Is that fair? And so we're saying, taxation's not a bad word, it's a question of who pays. And what we've seen over the years has been a shift from taxes being paid by those who can most afford to pay to the taxes by and large being responsibility and having to be paid by people who can least afford to pay. And the other thing that we said, and we're quite categorical, we will not support in this budget any increases of taxes on the middle class. So it is an approach that we think is balanced. What Andrew Horwath has said, we need to recognize that those who could least afford to pay need respite. We have said, in fact, we would not support a budget or any initiative that would increase personal income tax or taxes on the middle class, and that we believe that there has to be a little bit of a shift so that those who can most afford to pay their fair share of taxes. And so I say to my friends in the Conservative caucus, the motion as you write it, I think we have to just make it as somewhat laughable. The Tories over the last 2.5 years of this minority parliament have done one huge error in my view. They forgot what the people decided on election day. People on election day said, this is a minority parliament. They said, yes, we are putting the Liberals in the penalty box. We are not giving them a majority government. But neither did they give the Conservatives or the NDP the reward of majority government. And they said, we're setting all of you back in order to be able to work together to do what's right for Ontarians. And what I think New Democrats have tried to do over the last 2.5 years, and we will continue to do, is to look at each item and to say, what does this mean for the people back home? What does this mean to the businesses and corporate sector in Ontario? How is this going to benefit Ontario? And so we have taken some positions that have not been easy to take at times, such as supporting the first two budgets by way of making agreements with the Liberals on both those budgets, because we thought it was a right thing to do. The Conservatives took the position, oh no, the only thing we do is say no. We don't read anything, we don't study anything, we don't look at anybody else's proposals, we just say no. And that's what this motion is basically about. It's another no before they got to read anything. How responsible is it? You have to ask yourself the question. When a political party, in this case the official opposition, is saying no to something they haven't even seen. It seems to me that that is the wrong approach. The people of Ontario sent us here and said, this is a minority parliament. You shall figure out how to make it work. This parliament at one point it's either going to run its course or it'll be defeated. That is the process by which minority parliaments work. But while we're here, we need to ensure that we do the right thing for the people back home. So New Democrats, to the point that the Conservatives are making, have long argued and will continue to argue, and we will be the champions on fair taxation. I am proud to be a member of this caucus who in the first budget said it is a fair thing to do to have a fairness tax for those people over $500,000, and that we shift some of that responsibility to those who most can pay. I am proud to be a member of a caucus and having a leader, Andrea Horwath, who has said, you know what, if we're going to pay for transportation across Ontario, we need to find some revenue and we need to find some savings on the revenue side. A very small increase on the corporate tax rate will not hurt, because we are the most competitive jurisdiction when it comes to corporate taxes. I am proud that we have taken the position we shall not allow the HST inputs to be passed on, because this is money that Ontario can ill afford to give. Can you imagine you have a credit card bill of whatever it is, and all of a sudden you take away income that you may have to pay your credit card bill? That's essentially what these guys are doing. And I'm also very proud as a New Democrat to have suggested earlier this spring that there should be a reduction in small business taxes. The NDP government in Manitoba has recognized and has moved to 0% tax on small businesses. Because if you're going to try to encourage one sector of your economy to be able to invest and to be able to grow, that's the sector of the economy that needs the most help. You know, I've got nothing against any large corporation. As many of you know, I frequent with a number of them, mining, forestry, energy. I've been around here a long time, know many CEOs and know many boards and managers of mills and different companies on a first-name basis. And don't begrudge them trying to run a good operation and making a profit. But I'll tell you, it's not that large corporation who needs the biggest break. It's a small business owner who's working hard, he or she, to be able, through the sweat of their brow, to build something for them and their family and their community. And I'm proud to be a member of a caucus under Andrea Horwath that says, hey, we got to help the small business sector, and we're prepared to roll out a reduction on the small business tax in order to be able to assist that particular sector. So, Mr. Speaker, New Democrats understand it's about fair taxation. The Tories take the position that they're taking in this motion is akin to what they've done for the last 2.5 years. No to absolutely everything. I don't want to read nothing. I don't want to see nothing. It's like Schultz in the old Starlight 13 movies or series, Hogan's Heroes. Starlight 13 was the other one. That's right. I see nothing. I know nothing. It's like Schultz. These guys are just not responsible when it comes to the responsibility that they were given by the people of Ontario. And as for the pension issue, this one here really bothers me, because I think we can all agree in this place there is a problem when it comes to people being able to afford to retire. Let me tell you a secret. You might not know this. There are no pensions for MPPs. Unbeknownst to most people, because everybody in my constituency thinks I'm going to get a big MPP's pension, there is none. But neither is there pensions for about 80% of workers in this province. And clearly, something has to be done to try to address that. And what I find a bit galling by this whole process is Andrea Horwath and New Democrats put out a proposal prior to the last election that looked at providing an Ontario-style pension program that would give workers an opportunity to opt into a defined pension plan under the OPP, or an Ontario pension plan. It wasn't mandatory. It was a plan where you were able to choose and say, I'd rather be in an RSP plan or I want to be in the OPP plan. And what did the Liberals do when we proposed that? They voted it down. So here they are in the run-up to their budgets and maybe an election, depending on what happens. Oh my God, we got to do something about pensions. Where you been for 11 years? Why haven't you supported our motions? We've been talking about this issue for years, and you guys all of a sudden have woken up and said, oh my God, we got to do something? Give me a break. You know, Liberals are pretty notorious at doing what's right and politically expedient for themselves. You look at what's going on now. 7 years in Northern Ontario, people have been saying this government has got to get serious about the Ring of Fire. There is an opportunity not only to create mining jobs in the Ring of Fire, there is an opportunity to create a stainless steel industry for all of Ontario. And they've been absolutely nowhere for 7 years, except they put it, I believe, in 2 throne speeches that they were going to do something, and they certainly have put it at least in 3 budgets. And what have they done? Oh my God, just before a budget, and who knows, maybe an election, we have $1 billion for the Ring of Fire. Well, where have these guys been for the last 7 years? You know, we've said to you, the secret to the Ring of Fire isn't very complicated. The province, we said as New Democrats, should put on the table the money necessary to be our 1/3 share of the development of the infrastructure to the Ring of Fire. Depending if it's rail or road, it's anywhere from 250 to 300 million up to maybe 600 or 700 million. So where's the $1 billion that the government comes up with is a whole other question, but we'll leave that for another debate. But we have said from the beginning, the province should say, here's our share, the 200, 300, 400 million, whatever it is, that we're prepared to put into infrastructure, quid pro quo, that the private sector's got to put in their 1/3, and the federal government's got to come in and do theirs. In exchange for doing that, we as a provincial government will do revenue sharing on new mining when it comes to mining in this province for First Nations and other communities, so that we can share in the revenue that the province gets and the federal government gets when it comes to mining, because First Nations have been completely left out. That would bring them to the table. It allows us to deal with a number of other issues, and that we'd be very aggressive on the training programs in order to give people of Northern Ontario the ability to train into those jobs so that they can get them, with an exchange that we put an emphasis on developing a stainless steel industry for Ontario. But these guys, what do? 7 years, not a lot to be said. So we got Bob Ray, who's got a plan to make a plan. So that's what was announced the other day at the smudging ceremony up in Thunder Bay. Where have they been for 7 years? It took them 7 years to come up with, I've got a plan to make a plan. My God, where you guys been? And then they announced $1 billion, just like they said, oh, and we have $2.5 billion for this. We got $800 million for this. We got another $1 billion. They're throwing money off the side of the boat as if it's like paper money. Well, maybe it is paper money. Maybe these guys have no intention of spending that money should they, you know, should they have the opportunity. Like, where are you going to get the backing, the dollars to do this stuff? I don't say that investments in the Ring of Fire is bad. I don't say investments in developmental services is bad. I'm not talking against any of this, but where have you been for 11 years? It's all of a sudden, it's like we're coming up to a budget and you're trying to cover your bets, and you're saying, we're going to throw everything we got, including the kitchen sink, at trying to find some way to appease every voter in the province of Ontario. Well, I don't think it's going to work. I think at one point the public says, are they serious? Where have they been? Anyways, that's the point I wanted to make to that one. The other thing I just want to say in regards to the issue of the debt and deficit, my colleague from Parkdale High Park raised this, our opposition whip, in regards to the record of New Democrats when it comes to balancing budgets. The figures are, and I was listening to the Conservatives, they were laughing and howling and saying, oh my God, what are you guys talking about? The figures are 73% of elected governments, Liberal governments, have posted deficits since the 1980s. 63% of Conservative governments in power have posted deficits since 1980. Only 50% of NDP elected governments have done the same. So the record clearly is, when it comes to power, New Democrats are much better fiscal managers. And I will argue, as a member of the NDP government, 1990 to 95, we got elected behind a Peterson government who said there was a balanced budget, and it turned out to be a $9.5 billion deficit the minute we opened the books. And yeah, we had a deficit. It was $9.5 billion, sir. I was there. I don't know where you were, but I remember looking at the books. And so the truth is, the Liberal Peterson government, as the Tories did to the Liberals prior to the first, 2 elections ago, essentially said to the people of Ontario, not only do we have a balanced budget, we have a slight surplus. I think it was of $300 million. We get elected, and I remember going to those first meetings, and they said, good news and the bad news. Hi, everybody, welcome to government. Bad news, the government's left us with a $9.5 billion debt. And we increased that deficit, yes, we increased that deficit by $1 billion in order to do an anti-recession fund for investment and to make sure that workers who were laid off got money when it come to their severances. And the reality is that you're like the Liberals have been the absolute worst. You guys, and I think the proof is what's happening in this budget right now is that it would appear, I don't know, I'll have to see the.
I think I heard an unparliamentary remark. Is there a member for Vaughan? Yeah. You need to stand up and withdraw.
But I withdraw.
Member for Timmins James Bay.
So as I say, the reality is New Democrats have a much better record when it comes to balancing the books than both the Liberals and Conservatives put together. I want to also make one last comment on debt and deficit. I was doing an interview with CFRA, I believe it was, not too long ago, and they were asking us about why it is that New Democrats seem these days to be much more fiscally prudent than what they imagined us to be in the past. And I says, no, it has always been the long position of social democratic parties like ours that, in fact, you don't spend what you don't got. Tommy Douglas, I'm going to ask you this question. What is the first thing that Tommy Douglas did when he was elected as a government was to balance the budget? Very, very first thing. What was the second thing that he did? I bet most people don't even know this. Most people say, oh, it was healthcare number one, and when they say, no, it was balancing the budget, they say, oh, well, then it must have been the second thing. No. You know what the second thing was? He electrified rural Saskatchewan because he understood that if farming was going to grow and prosper in Saskatchewan, you needed to have electricity in rural parts of Saskatchewan so they can compete with places around the world, especially those places we were competing with in Northern Ontario. It wasn't until 3 elections later and a balanced budget that Tommy Douglas put forward the issue of having a medical program as we know it today. And yes, he raised some taxes for it, because we understood then, as we do now, at times you have to have, well, not at times, but you have to have the capacity to pay. We're saying as New Democrats today, you have maxed out the middle class. Between what we're having to pay with our hydro bills and what we're having to pay with the, our gas bills, with the 40% increase that we've seen this fall, with what we're having to see with the overall cost of what it's costing the middle class, there is no room. So we have made a pledge and we have said we will not raise taxes on the middle class. Point final. Why? Because they can least afford it. So to the Opposition Day motion of my friends from the Conservative Party, I just say, this is more of the same. This is a Conservative Party who votes against things before they read it. They make up their mind before they read it. They decide that their view of the world is the only view of the world. They don't believe in compromise whatsoever. And worst of all, they don't accept that the people of Ontario in the last election said to all of the parties, this is a minority parliament, go back and make it work. And instead, what do? They have motions such as this, as what we see as being somewhat silly. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, we will see what will happen in the upcoming vote.